Yes, it's me, Sean, and you're listening to The 3-Month Vacation. When's the best time to get a natural-looking photo of a person? If you've ever tried taking a photo of a person or a group, you usually end up with the same cheesy look. That's because people put on a fake smile just for the camera. They're all smiling, but you can tell it's a posed photo. However, just after you've clicked the photo, they tend to relax. Now, if you had kept clicking, there's a pretty good chance you'd have got a more natural-looking photo. Okay, so now that you've heard this information, will you implement it? If you're like most people, the chances of implementing this idea is really bleak. Part of the reason why we forget is because we are not used to the raw power of every day. We all know, and we've been told repeatedly, that every day matters. But then we use slightly ridiculous terms like practice, when, frankly, there are other things in play. So let's look at why everyday activities outperform something that you do every now and then. Let's look at 3 broad areas. Everyday matters because the first thing is that book concepts come alive. The second, it helps you make progressive mistakes. And finally, you get to harness serendipity. Let's start out with the first one, which is book concepts come alive. Have you ever seen a Jeep with 50 people on it? While I was in Rajasthan, India, we encountered transport systems that were quite different from other parts of the world. Every day, people living up the hills need to get down into the valley to work on the farms. Since there's no public transportation, private vans are the primary sources of transport. It's commonplace to see 24 people sitting in the Jeep and another 24 on top. I'd never seen anything quite like it, so I decided I had to take some pictures, at least a few pictures, but I had no idea how to do so. We were in another vehicle and the Jeep was approaching us, so imagine my surprise when I pointed the camera at the oncoming Jeep and it came to a complete halt. The driver had decided that it was fine for me to take as many pictures as I needed. A second earlier, the passengers in the Jeep were absorbed in their own world, and 1 second later, they were posing for me. I got my picture, and then they all smiled and laughed, and the van sped off. That's when I realized I had made a critical mistake. Instead of continuing to click the images, I put the camera down. I got a lovely set of posed pictures, but nothing that captured the natural behavior of the people on the van. I was a bit annoyed with myself because I'd read not once but many times about how a photographer should keep clicking, because the moment after the pose is when you get the natural look. Book concepts don't easily translate into action. When we started this article, I mentioned how it's essential to take a picture once people have stopped posing. And the Jeep story, it highlights the same idea. The idea of taking pictures once people have stopped posing. However, reading something in a book doesn't prompt most of us to take action. It's only when you make the mistake repeatedly that the idea seems to sear into your memory. When you and I do something every day, we have the chance to make the same mistake repeatedly. When we stumble, we realize we're making an error and we recall what we have read. However, without somehow doing the same activity or similar activity every day, you don't have the chance to make the mistake often enough. If you want to eliminate errors in your life, you have to make these mistakes repeatedly. And when I bring up this kind of conversation, people always tell me, oh, I'm the world's champion at making mistakes. I make so many mistakes. And the reality is you probably make too few mistakes. You need to make a lot more mistakes. It's almost like the movie Groundhog Day, where the character relives the same day repeatedly. However, because he's aware of the mistake that's about to occur, he avoids it altogether. If you're a writer and you want to avoid making the same mistakes, you have to write daily. You don't have to write an article daily. You just have to write daily. Writing an article daily, that's too hard. Making some very complex dish every day, that's too hard. But cooking every day, writing every day, whatever, singing every day, baking every day, I don't know what it is you do. But doing something on a consistent basis is what allows you to make mistakes. It's easy to believe the concept of practice, practice, practice. This isn't about practice. It's about a concept that you've read about, you've watched, you've listened to. It's in a book. And now you need to put it into action. And the only way to put it into action is to have some action. Because when you do that action, you will make the mistake. If you go to a Photoshop class, you will learn about it. But until you do it, you don't realize that it's not as easy as when you were in the class. So you'll get stuck somewhere. You will make the mistake. And then it'll translate from just being a book concept into something real. And that's the first reason why every day matters. Every day matters because what's in the book is really in the book until you do something, make the mistake, and then fix it. And you'd have thought, okay, we've talked enough about mistakes. But no, this second part is about making progressive mistakes. In America, 97% of the population seems to have ketchup in their homes. Yet, ketchup isn't American at all. The word originates from a Hokkien Chinese word, which sounds something like ketsup. And it was originally a sauce derived from fermented fish. The recipes seemed to change once the British encountered the sauce, but they added ingredients such as mushrooms, walnuts, oysters, even anchovies. The ketchup was then thin and dark and lacked the ingredients that we know so well. And most importantly, it had no tomato. It's not like tomato ketchup solved the problem either. When tomato growers tried to preserve tomato pulp, the sauce was often contaminated with bacteria, spores, yeast, and mold. They'd add sodium benzoate to counter the spoilage, but that's as nasty as it sounds. It's only when a Pittsburgh man named Henry J. Hines decided to remove the benzoate and work on another formula containing vinegar did we get an early version of today's ketchup. In other words, the ketchup that we enjoy today was a result of a lot of evolution. As terrible as it sounds, evolution needs to make a lot of mistakes. Working on something on an everyday basis is a bit like inventing ketchup. You need to make as many errors as possible and then keep rectifying them as you go along. Once again, people will tell you that they make mistakes. The reality is they don't make enough of them. Most people make a few hundred mistakes a year when they should be dealing with thousands. Daily work allows you to make these mistakes in small portions every single day and then fix them progressively. You don't fix everything on the same day. You might start off with a Monday mistake, which doesn't get fixed till Wednesday or maybe Friday or maybe next Friday. But progressively, all of these errors start reducing and you get new errors. If we take the example of my watercolor work, in 2010, I went to a watercolor class because I was truly horrid with watercolors. Until that point, I'd never used paints from tubes, and I depended on a very terrible plastic palette. I had no idea how to use the paper or to avoid the big cauliflowers that you get when you put too much water on the paper. However, after 2 or 3 classes, I thought I made excellent progress. I went up to the teacher. I proudly showed him my work. He looked at it and made a suggestion. "Is there something you can do daily?" he asked me. I thought about it, and I decided that I could draw and paint a very basic diary in watercolor. At this point, 552 days have elapsed. Yes, I've been drawing almost every day in watercolor, and while I have a more modest 4,000 paintings, not 500, not 5,582, I see them as 4,000 progressive mistakes. Mistakes that I probably made 3 weeks ago, I've fixed now, or 3 months ago, I've fixed now. And I know they're mistakes because I can tell you what I'd fix. So I can pick up a book from 2014 and I tell you what was wrong with those drawings. I could just as easily open a page from 2018 and describe how I changed the thickness of paint, the font, or even how I lay out the page. When creating the image, I was doing the best I could at that time. But because I was doing it almost every day, I was making progressive mistakes. Every day doesn't literally mean every single day. There are gaps along the way. There have been times when I've not done or wanted to do a thing for 2 months at a stretch. Then, with a lot of difficulty, I'll get back to making those mistakes and fixing them as I progress. And this also applies to business. We had courses that seemed terrific back in 2005, yet 2 decades later, we're still finding mistakes in the content, the delivery, how to teach. Now, you may not do a course, you might not write, draw every single day, but you do something. And if you do that something every single day, you've got now an ongoing journey. Making progressive mistakes also does another thing, and that is to develop speed. Talent is really science at high speed. Yes, it's science at high speed. That's what art is. When somebody does something really quickly, it's not that they're an artist. We know this because they do the same or have the same style. And so that's a science. When you do the same thing over and over again, that's science. When you do it really quickly, it's called art. And when you do it really slowly, that's because you're making lots of mistakes. So if you and I don't make progressive mistakes, then we will never get to that desired speed. Mistake making is crucial. You must make progressive mistakes, whether you're making an omelette, you're painting, or for that matter, making tomato ketchup. As you can tell, you can only progress when you make a lot of them. Hence, if you run into that person who tells you that they are making mistakes all the time, you need to remind them that they need to ramp up the errors so that they can fix an unending string of mistakes as they go along. But there is a third reason why every day matters, and it's called serendipity. In the past, I'd remove my fancy camera about 3 times a year, usually when I was going on a trip or for some special occasion. And then I got some advice that improved my photography forever. You'll not believe the advice. It's so simple that you think, well, does it even count as advice? And the advice was, take your camera wherever you go. I listened to that and I decided to take my camera everywhere. I take it to weddings, the cafe, even to dinner. People who don't recognize me at first, they look at the camera and then they know it's me. However, this story isn't about me or even about photography. Instead, it's about creating more surface area by doing something almost daily. The more you show up, the more the chances you have of something happening. If you do something infrequently, then it better turn out right. On the other hand, if you do something every day, you tend to experiment. Maybe you sketch every day and you decide, okay, I'll try a new pen, or there's this different style I saw today, let me try that. Doing something frequently helps you notice patterns that work, and sometimes you see what doesn't. If you look at perfectionists, you'll notice something, and that is they don't do stuff frequently enough. So every time they do something, it has to be perfect. But if you do it on a regular basis, you don't have that much time to be perfect all the time. So you get better than most perfectionists simply by doing stuff every single day. Now here's the problem. We're all busy. How do you fit everything into one day? Remember when you first learned to drive, you had to focus on everything to keep the car on the road. Even starting up was a challenge in itself. Yet today, you and I could probably think nothing of driving. You might not drive for months and then you're right into it. This ability to do things at high speed results from something that is done every day until you get to a certain level. You get very quick at it. And once you get very quick at it, you develop more skills and can do the same task easily. It's often a lot faster as well. At first, a skill takes you ages. Then, as you get faster, you can add more into the mix until you get to the point where you no longer have to make excuses. You can do half a dozen, if not a dozen activities without breaking into a sweat. That's how you can fit a lot of activities into any day. It won't happen today or tomorrow, but before you know it, 5,582 days will pass, and then you will be stunningly good at many skills. Or not. It just depends on whether you have an everyday plan in place. So, what was this podcast about? It was about everyday and why it matters. The first reason was that we read stuff in books, but books don't give us anything but more information. And if you want to make that concept come alive, you want to take better pictures of people, you don't want them to look posed, well, you have to do something about it. You have to take a picture, make the mistake, and go, I knew I shouldn't have done that. And then the next time you fix it. So it makes book concepts come alive. The second thing is it helps you make progressive mistakes. People who say that they make lots of mistakes, well, they don't. Believe me. You have to make thousands and thousands of mistakes. And then that enables you to make tiny mistakes along the way and fix them as you go along. And sometimes the mistake you made in June gets fixed in November, but it gets fixed. The third thing is it helps you with serendipity. And that is, if you take your camera out every day, there's a good chance that maybe 20 times, 50 times, 70 times, you'll run into something that's interesting. And if you take it out 3 times a year, you better be lucky. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. What is the one thing that I want you to think about? Well, I would say progressive mistakes, because if you're making just hundreds of mistakes, you're just not doing enough. Whatever it is you're doing, you need to make thousands of mistakes and let the mistake of February fix itself in June or in November, or whatever. And you have to have that time. I do this every day. I wake up at 4 o'clock, and I know I'm crazy, but I start listening to my French, and I do 50 new sentences and 75 existing sentences every day. I've been doing this now for, 310 days back to back. Even on holiday, except on holiday I did just fewer. So the point is that I'm making thousands of mistakes. How many thousands? Well, I've covered over 7,000 sentences right now and over 70,000 repetitions. So if you thought I was just talking about hundreds and thousands just as a generic idea, it's real. It's actually thousands of mistakes. When I'm doing other stuff, maybe not, but this is the whole thing. Whether, you learn how to dance, to cook, to draw, to do any skill, you've got to make lots of mistakes, and you're not making enough mistakes. So you have to set up a time to do this every day so that you can make the mistakes and make progressive mistakes. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in psychotactics now. Couple of things. The first thing is that the article writing course is in progress right now. It's a live course. And when I say live, it is conducted through a forum, which you think, what? Forum? Yeah. There's no videos, there's no live calls, there's nothing like that. And yet it's very intense. It's called the toughest writing course in the world, and you probably missed it. Anyway, what's coming up is the cartooning course. And you're going to learn how to draw your own character. I'm telling you, if you want to make lots of mistakes and get them rectified at super speed, this is the course you want to do. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely more fun than most of the other skills. And you'll see how you can improve within days. Now, you might think you can't draw. Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and then going for seconds and thirds. And this is several weeks of eating pudding and enjoying it. So that's at psychotactics.com/DaVinci. Go there and get yourself on the list because that's coming up next. There's also pre-sell. Now, what we tend to do, which is what I just did, is pre-sell something. Weeks, months in advance, we set the scene so that on the day itself, we don't have to depend so much on the sales page. People have already sold it to themselves. And you want to know how this pre-sale is done? There is a course, and you go to psychotactics.com/presell, PRESELL, and you find out for yourself. You get some goodies there. They're all good goodies, good goodies, good goodies. Okay, enough of this nonsense. Remember, DaVinci and pre-sell. That's it from me. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.